This is the story of a newly printed letterhead, a reassigned boardroom chair, and the precise moment Queen Camilla realized she would never be permitted to inherit the moral authority of the late Queen Elizabeth II in less than 48 hours. What began as a highly calculated attempt to hijack the most significant historical memorial of the decade ended in a devastating institutional humiliation. It happened not with a public confrontation, not with a leaked tabloid scandal, but with the cold, immovable reality of charitable protocol. When Camilla opened the final administrative dockets for the upcoming centenary of the Queen Mother, fully expecting to see her own name listed as the Supreme Patron, she found the designation blankly, ruthlessly transferred. In that singular freezing second, her 30-year illusion of absolute power collapsed. What this video will unpack is the anatomy of a silent, ruthless institutional retaliation. We are going to examine the secret administrative power grab Camilla attempted as the royal family prepared for the historic April 2026 centenary, celebrating 100 years since the birth of Queen Elizabeth II. We will explore how she quietly manipulated the Palace Charity Commission in an effort to absorb the late Queen's towering legacy into her own civilian portfolio. Most importantly, we will reveal how Princess Anne, acting as the ultimate guardian of her mother's memory, forensically uncovered this maneuver and executed a brutal, silent checkmate. By the end of this analysis, you will understand the staggering psychological blow delivered to Camilla when she realized that while she may occupy the throne room, she will never be allowed to rewrite the history of the British crown. To understand why this trap snapped shut with such devastating precision, we first have to rebuild the towering illusion of authority Camilla has constructed over the last 3 decades. For years, she executed a masterclass in psychological endurance. She absorbed the public hatred, survived the darkest media storms, and meticulously transformed herself from the ultimate outsider into the anointed Queen Consort. Following the transition of power, her survival instinct morphed into a dangerous sense of total ownership. She began to view the institution not as a historic trust to be preserved, but as a corporate entity ready to be reorganized and rebranded according to her private designs. We saw the signs early on. The subtle erasure of Princess Diana's historical footprint, the quiet insertion of her own companions into the royal machinery, the aggressive push to elevate her non-royal children, giving them prime positioning at state events. But as her reign progressed, Camilla's ambition shifted toward a much larger target, the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II herself. Camilla believed she had King Charles completely controlled, and in her mind, the king's authority was her authority. She assumed that her elevation to the title of Queen meant she had automatically inherited the matriarchal supremacy of the Windsor family. She looked at the chessboard, saw Catherine away from the public eye focusing on her health, and believed she had achieved checkmate. She felt completely, undeniably untouchable. But that is where the story changes, because absolute power often breeds a fatal kind of arrogance, and Camilla's arrogance led her to cross the one invisible line that the true heirs of the bloodline had sworn to defend with their lives. The trigger for this crisis was not a grand public declaration, but a quiet, deeply cynical administrative maneuver centered around the upcoming Elizabeth II Centenary Trust. In April 2026, the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth are set to celebrate what would have been the late Queen's 100th birthday. To mark this monumental occasion, a massive global charity and memorial fund was being established behind closed doors. This trust represents the ultimate visual and moral real estate of the modern monarchy. Whoever is named the Supreme Patron of this organization dictates the narrative of the royal family for the next decade. What appears to be true, based on the shifting of palace logistics, is that Camilla's camp quietly submitted a revised patronage directive to the Privy Council and the Charities Commission. The plan was as subtle as it was insidious. Camilla sought to be officially named the sole Supreme Patron of the Centenary Trust. But her goal was not simply to honor her late mother-in-law. Her objective was to quietly funnel the massive global spotlight, the prestige, and the philanthropic leverage of the centenary directly toward her own private charities and civilian networks. It was commercial desperation masquerading as royal duty. Camilla owns no vast historical legacy. Her personal status is entirely dependent on her proximity to Charles. She realized that by securing the supreme patronage, she could artificially inflate her standing and permanently attach her name to the most beloved monarch in modern British history. That detail matters. Camilla calculated that the family was too distracted by ongoing challenges and the king's restricted schedule to notice a bureaucratic adjustment to a charitable board. She assumed that by framing the request as a supportive duty to the king, the palace bureaucracy would quietly rubber stamp the paperwork. But she fundamentally misunderstood the ruthless institutional discipline of the true heirs, and she entirely forgot about the fierce, protective loyalty of the Princess Royal. Princess Anne did not find out through palace gossip. She found out because, as the executor of her mother's authentic legacy and a meticulous overseer of royal patronages, she reviews the organisational frameworks of all major state and philanthropic trusts. When the preliminary charter for the Centenary Trust crossed her desk, the calculated elevation of the Queen Consort was immediately flagged. Anne did not see a routine update designed to streamline royal duties. She saw a calculated insult to the memory of Queen Elizabeth II. What Princess Anne discovered was a staggering exploitation of protocol. Camilla was utilizing a grey area in the transitional management of court charities to quietly absorb the sovereign's historical capital. Anne recognized that if Camilla was granted control of the Centenary, the legacy of a woman who served the nation for 70 years would be diluted and repurposed to validate the very woman who had caused the institution so much historical damage. It was a direct threat to the pristine preservation of the monarchy, and so the Princess Royal did not scream. She did not run to the tabloid press to leak stories of internal warfare. She weaponized the system. The execution of the retaliation was a masterclass in cold institutional warfare. Working in silent coalition with Prince William Anne allowed the illusion to continue just long enough for the trap to be inescapable. They let Camilla's aides finalize the charitable rosters. They let her select her wardrobe for the inaugural press launch. They let her believe that the ultimate royal makeover was complete and that the ghost of Queen Elizabeth II was finally hers to command, and then the invisible hand of the true bloodline moved. Utilizing her immense leverage within the family council and her direct legal authority over her mother's memorial assets, Princess Anne initiated a comprehensive, unappealable correction of the charitable trust. She invoked strict, uncompromising parliamentary and royal charter guidelines regarding how sovereign memorials must be managed. The ledgers were locked. The original frameworks honouring the direct line of succession were flawlessly restored. What looked like a routine administrative update was actually a total dismantling of Camilla's authority. The directive placing Camilla as Supreme Patron was quietly marked as unauthorised. When the final unalterable board binders were delivered to Camilla's private quarters on the morning of the trust's finalisation, the reality of her defeat was laid bare in black and white. Her name had not just been removed from the Supreme Patron slot. It had been entirely relegated to a secondary honorary advisory list. The primary role, the ultimate moral authority of the Centenary, had been legally and irrevocably handed to Catherine, the Princess of Wales. Camilla sat in her private apartments, the illusion of her absolute power shattering around her. She had pushed for total institutional control, and in doing so, she had handed Princess Anne the exact justification needed to strip her of everything. The boardroom doors were bolted, the charitable access was revoked, the reality of her commercial desperation was exposed for the entire palace institution to see. Trapped, deeply humiliated, and suddenly realizing the terrifying extent of the administrative war built against her, Camilla reached for the secure telephone line to call her husband the king, desperately expecting him to save her empire from the cold fury of the true heirs. The phone call from Camilla to King Charles was supposed to be the moment the monarch stepped in to crush the rebellion and restore her authority. For over 30 years, Charles had been her ultimate shield. He had torn apart his first marriage, defied the late Queen Elizabeth II, and risked the very survival of the monarchy to ensure that Camilla would one day occupy the throne room by his side. In her panic as the reality of Princess Anne's brutal administrative checkmate set in, she expected that same unconditional protection. She expected the king to pick up the secure line, summon the master of the household, and demand that the Privy Council revert the charitable drafts to reinstate her as the Supreme Patron of the Centenary Trust. But what she received instead was the most devastating psychological blow of her entire royal life. When Charles answered the phone, he listened to the frantic demands of his wife. He heard the humiliation in her voice as she explained that the boardroom rosters had been locked, that her name had been quietly demoted to an honorary advisory list, and that the ultimate moral authority of the late Queen's memorial had been handed to Catherine. And then there was silence. It was not a silence of contemplation, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a man who suddenly realizes the definitive limits of his own authority. Charles did not rage against his sister. He did not promise to call the Charity Commission to fix it. Instead, in a quiet, defeated tone, he told her there was nothing he could do. That is the exact moment the illusion of absolute power shattered permanently. Camilla realized that her husband's love did not equate to institutional protection. To understand why Charles refused to save her grand strategy, we have to look at the cold, hard mechanics of royal survival. Charles knows that his reign is entirely transitional. He knows perhaps better than anyone that the ghost of his mother still casts a towering shadow over his throne. To publicly override his sister, the Princess Royal, on an issue regarding the sacred memory of Queen Elizabeth II would not just be a family dispute, it would trigger a catastrophic public relations crisis. Princess Anne had brilliantly framed the patronage correction not as a personal vendetta against Camilla, but as a rigid administrative adherence to sovereign tradition. The late Queen Elizabeth II was a blood monarch, and her centenary must be spearheaded by the bloodline that will carry her legacy into the future. If Charles intervened to strip that honour from the Princess of Wales simply to feed his wife's ambition, he would look weak, ungrateful, and profoundly disrespectful to his own mother's memory. Faced with a choice between protecting Camilla's social vanity and preserving the fragile dignity of his own crown, Charles chose the crown. This brings us to the staggering reality of Camilla's commercial desperation. The public often assumes that because she wears the Queen's crown, she possesses an unshakable historical legacy. Nothing could be further from the truth. The brutal reality that Princess Anne's audit exposed is that Camilla possesses no authentic historical capital. Her entire philanthropic portfolio is relatively modern and entirely dependent on her marriage. She spent decades clawing her way to the top of the social hierarchy, only to discover that you cannot legally acquire the moral authority of the woman you replaced. Her desperate push to hijack the 2026 centenary was never just about charity work. It was a frantic attempt to stockpile visible historical influence. Camilla knows that she is a civilian consort operating on borrowed time. If she outlives Charles, she has no ancestral wealth or constitutional right to remain at the center of the global stage. By attempting to attach her name as the Supreme Patron of the most beloved monarch in modern British history, she was trying to artificially inflate her standing. She was attempting to use the late Queen's sacred memory to build a fortress of public goodwill that Prince William could not tear down. But the internal audit proved her total vulnerability. She is merely a high-status tenant of the throne, not the owner of its history. This structural realignment is profoundly evident in how Catherine, the Princess of Wales, quietly took her rightful place. While Camilla was reduced to fighting covert humiliating battles over board seats and letterheads, Catherine effortlessly secured the institutional future. Nature abhors a vacuum, and power in the royal family never simply disappears, it is redistributed. Catherine did not gloat over the collapse of Camilla's patronage plan. She did not leak triumphant stories to the press. Her execution of power is entirely visual and devastatingly precise. Just days after the Centenary Trust was finalized, Catherine attended a high-profile diplomatic reception. The world was watching, waiting for a sign of internal palace friction. Instead, Catherine emerged radiating absolute unshakable authority. And the detail that mattered most was draped around her neck. She wore the late Queen Elizabeth II's signature 3-strand pearl necklace, a piece of such profound historical weight that it instantly silenced the room. It was not just an accessory, it was a definitive institutional statement. By wearing the pearls while quietly accepting the role of Supreme Patron, Catherine was demonstrating exactly who holds the keys to the kingdom's moral legacy. The contrast could not have been more brutal for the viewing public and for Camilla. Here was Catherine, a woman who has endured relentless public scrutiny and private health battles with uncomplaining grace, stepping seamlessly into the matriarchal shoes of the Windsor family. She did not need to scheme for access or manipulate charity commissions. The wealth, the history, and the future of the crown belonged to her and her children by absolute right. Every time Catherine steps out representing the centenary, she serves as a walking, breathing reminder of an impenetrable, authentic bloodline. Following this devastating checkmate, subtle administrative shifts began sweeping through the royal residences. Palace staff, taking their cues from the new center of gravity, established by William and Anne, quietly executed a series of visual corrections. prominent portraits of Queen Elizabeth II, which had been subtly moved to less trafficked corridors during the early days of Charles's reign to make room for the new king and queen, were suddenly brought out of storage. They were meticulously cleaned, reframed, and hung in the primary reception rooms at Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle. These are the exact rooms Camilla must walk through to access. The state dining areas. That is not an accident, that is pure weaponized protocol. It is a daily, inescapable reminder to Camilla that she may occupy the position, but she will never erase the ghost. William and Anne have systematically restored the hierarchy. They have drawn a cold administrative boundary around the king's wife, isolating her ambition and neutralizing her influence over the broader historical narrative of the institution. What this story ultimately reveals is the profound evolution of the alliance between Prince William and Princess Anne. Together, they have become the silent, ruthless executioners of royal discipline. They understand that the monarchy is a business, a brand, and a continuous historical threat, and they will not allow it to be plundered by interlopers acting out of commercial desperation. Camilla thought she was playing a game of social dominance, but the true heirs were playing a game of institutional preservation. They let her reach the very height of her arrogance, let her broadcast her intentions to her inner circle, and then they simply pulled the administrative floor out from under her. She has been left with the one thing she always wanted, the title of queen, only to realize it is an empty vessel. She is a queen in name, living in a gilded cage, managed, audited, and entirely controlled by her stepson and her sister-in-law. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the hidden power dynamics of the royal family. If you found this forensic breakdown insightful, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more long-form analytical content. Let me know in the comments below. Do you think Princess Anne was right to strip the patronage from the Queen Consort, or was it a step too far? I read every single comment, and I will see you in the next video.